How does a child disappear from her own bedroom while her family sleeps just feet away? No broken window, no loud struggle, just silence. And then she's gone. On June 5, 2002, 14-year-old Elizabeth Smart vanished from her Salt Lake City home in the middle of the night. At first, it looked impossible. Then it looked intentional. And then it looked far more disturbing. What really happened inside that quiet house? And how did the man responsible manage to hide in plain sight for months? Stay with me, because the truth only gets stranger from here. The immediate assumption was every parent's nightmare: a home invasion. Elizabeth's younger sister reported seeing a man in their bedroom. A tall figure, dark hair, a knife. But here's the twist. The description sounded familiar. Too familiar. The family had recently hired a handyman. A man who sang hymns in the yard. A man who spoke of faith and destiny. His name was Brian David Mitchell. Was it really possible that someone welcomed into the home could have orchestrated something so calculated? Comment below. Coincidence or warning sign ignored? Investigators began searching for forced entry. None. No shattered glass. No obvious signs of chaos. That detail changed everything. If there was no violent break-in, how did Mitchell get inside? Police quickly learned he had worked on the home before. He knew the layout. He knew the family. That familiarity wasn't random, it was strategic. But here's the bigger question. Was this crime impulsive or carefully rehearsed long before that night? Pause and think. Was this a moment of madness or months of planning? Brian David Mitchell wasn't just a handyman. He presented himself as a self-proclaimed prophet. He preached apocalyptic visions. He claimed divine revelation. At first glance, he appeared eccentric, maybe unstable. But investigators later asked a chilling question. Was that persona genuine belief or a mask for manipulation? Those who met him often described him as charismatic, convincing, persuasive. That combination can be powerful, especially to someone seeking control. So what happens when belief becomes a weapon? Stay with me, because his ideology would soon take center stage. As the search intensified, Elizabeth's face filled television screens across America. Volunteers combed neighborhoods. Helicopters circled overhead. Tips flooded in. Yet nothing concrete surfaced. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. But here's where it twists. Mitchell didn't flee the state immediately. In fact, reports later suggested he stayed relatively close for weeks. How does someone hide a kidnapped child in broad daylight without detection? Were there warning signs the public missed? Like this video, if you believe someone out there might have noticed something sooner. Mitchell was not alone. He had a wife, Wanda Barzee, quiet, often described as submissive. At first glance, she seemed secondary in the story. But was she? Investigators would later uncover that she played a role in keeping Elizabeth concealed. That complicates everything. One person committing a crime is disturbing. Two people sustaining it for months raises deeper psychological questions. Was Barzee coerced or complicit? Type A for coerced, B for complicit. I'm curious what you think. For 9 months, Elizabeth remained missing. 9 months of uncertainty. 9 months of fear. Meanwhile, Mitchell reportedly forced her to adopt a new name and identity. That psychological shift is critical. It suggests not just physical captivity, but mental control. Experts later pointed to manipulation tactics often used by cult leaders. Isolation, fear, religious distortion. But here's the new question. How does someone maintain that level of control in public spaces without being recognized? The answer would shock investigators. There were moments, small, fleeting moments, when Elizabeth was seen in public, walking beside Mitchell and Barzee, fully covered, disguised, hidden in plain sight. And here's the bigger twist. On at least one occasion, police reportedly interacted with the group but did not immediately identify her. That detail still unsettles many observers. How close did authorities come to ending this nightmare earlier? And what prevented that breakthrough? Comment below. Was this a failure of process or an understandable mistake? As weeks turned into months, hope began to fade. Media coverage shifted. Public attention wavered. Yet Elizabeth's family refused to stop searching. They kept her story alive. That persistence mattered. Because in cases like this, visibility can be the difference between obscurity and rescue. But here's the contradiction. If Mitchell wanted secrecy, why continue moving around in populated areas? Was it arrogance, delusion, or a calculated belief that his disguise would hold? Like and subscribe to Crime Rift as we break this down further. Brian David Mitchell's past began surfacing. He had a history of unstable behavior and religious extremism. Some acquaintances had distanced themselves long before 2002. Yet he had not been on law enforcement's radar as a violent offender. That gap raises a critical question. How many warning signs must exist before intervention happens? What investigators believed at first was a random predator scenario began to shift toward a pattern of escalating ideology. But was that ideology the root or just a justification? Elizabeth later described how fear was used as a constant tool. Threats, control, psychological pressure, not graphic violence but relentless intimidation. This is important because captivity is often sustained not just through force, but through belief. If a victim fears consequences beyond imagination, escape feels impossible. But here's what still doesn't make sense. How did no one in surrounding communities question the presence of a young girl traveling with this pair? Did assumptions override suspicion? What do you think? Yes or a no? Eventually, a breakthrough came from an observant member of the public. Suspicion was reported. Authorities stopped the trio again. This time, something clicked. The disguise didn't fully conceal Elizabeth's identity. Questions intensified. Mitchell reportedly denied wrongdoing, maintaining his prophetic persona. But reality was closing in. Imagine that moment. Months of captivity suddenly intersecting with scrutiny. Was this the turning point, or would his manipulation continue? Pause here. How would you react in that situation? On March 12, 2003, Elizabeth Smart was identified and safely recovered. The relief was immediate and overwhelming. A nation exhaled, but rescue was only the beginning. Now came the deeper question. What had truly happened during those 9 months? Investigators had to separate fact from narrative, belief from delusion. Mitchell's public statements continued to center on religious claims. Was he mentally ill or strategically performing instability? The courtroom would become the next battleground. Stay with me. Mitchell's defense team raised concerns about his competency to stand trial. That's a significant legal threshold. If someone cannot understand proceedings or assist in their defense, the trial cannot proceed. Evaluations began. Psychologists examined him. Observers noted his selective mutism, at times refusing to speak in court. Was this genuine impairment or calculated silence? What investigators believed initially began shifting again. If he was competent, accountability followed. If not, the legal path changed entirely. Which direction would this case go? Years passed before the trial fully unfolded. Delays centered around mental evaluations. Meanwhile, Elizabeth chose to speak publicly. Her voice reframed the narrative. She emphasized survival, resilience, and the importance of not blaming victims. That perspective reshaped public conversation. But here's the twist. Mitchell's ideology remained central to his defense narrative. If belief systems are extreme, does that absolve responsibility? Or does intent override ideology? Comment below, where do you draw that line? In 2010, Brian David Mitchell was found guilty of kidnapping and unlawful transportation of a minor. The verdict brought closure legally. He was sentenced to life in prison. Yet legal closure doesn't erase psychological impact, nor does it fully answer the lingering question of motive. Was control the primary objective? Was it delusion rooted in self-constructed prophecy? Or something more calculated? Like this video, if you believe justice was appropriately served. But the story doesn't end there. Wanda Barzee faced her own legal consequences. She pleaded guilty to federal charges related to the kidnapping. Her role sparked ongoing debate. Some viewed her as manipulated by Mitchell. Others saw active participation. The nuance matters. In complex cases, power dynamics can blur lines of autonomy. But here's what complicates it further. After serving her sentence, Barzee was later released under supervision. That decision reignited public emotion. Should rehabilitation apply equally in cases like this? Type yes or no below. Psychologists analyzing Mitchell described patterns often associated with narcissistic and delusional traits. However, official findings concluded he was legally competent. That distinction is critical. Mental illness does not automatically negate responsibility. Yet public confusion persists between diagnosis and accountability. What investigators believed at first, that he might be too unstable for trial, shifted to a finding of deliberate action. But how thin is that line between delusion and manipulation? And who decides? Stay with me. Elizabeth Smart later became an advocate for child safety and recovery efforts. That transformation adds another layer to this story. From victim to voice, from silence to activism. It challenges the narrative that trauma defines identity. Yet it also raises a broader societal question. Are systems today better prepared to recognize grooming and coercive control? Or do similar blind spots still exist? Pause and reflect. Has enough changed since 2002? Comment your thoughts below. Looking back, investigators acknowledged moments where recognition nearly occurred sooner. Encounters, tips, glimpses, each one represents a fork in the road. If identified earlier, months of captivity could have been prevented. But hindsight is powerful and often misleading. At the time, details were fragmented. Disguises were effective. Assumptions clouded perception. So here's the bigger twist. Was this case a failure of awareness? Or proof of how manipulation can override obvious signs? Like and subscribe if you're following this closely. Mitchell's writings and recorded statements revealed a self-created theology. He placed himself at the center of prophecy. That centralization of self is telling. Control, authority, divine mandate. It allowed him to rationalize actions that society condemns. But here's what remains unsettling. Did he truly believe his own narrative? Or was belief simply the most effective shield? What investigators believed at first evolved over time, but certainty remains elusive. What's your interpretation? Delusion or design? The media played a significant role in this case. Continuous coverage kept Elizabeth's face recognizable. That visibility likely contributed to her eventual identification. Yet media attention can also complicate investigations. It shapes public perception before all facts are known. In this case, narratives shifted repeatedly. Predator, prophet, madman, manipulator. Which label fits? Or do labels oversimplify complexity? Share this video if you believe awareness can still prevent future tragedies. Another layer often overlooked is community response. Neighbors had seen Mitchell before. Some considered him strange, but not dangerous. That distinction matters. Strange behavior does not equal criminal intent, but ignoring escalating warning signs can carry consequences. So how do communities balance tolerance with vigilance? Where is the line between eccentric and alarming? This case forces that uncomfortable conversation. Pause and consider, would you have reported him earlier? Be honest in the comments. During trial proceedings, prosecutors emphasized premeditation. The planning, the disguise, the isolation strategy, those elements suggested deliberate calculation. Meanwhile, the defense leaned into mental instability. Two narratives, one courtroom, one decision. The jury ultimately sided with accountability. But here's a new question. How differently might this case have unfolded if competency had been ruled otherwise? The legal system often hinges on psychological interpretation. Does that make outcomes fragile? Stay with me. Elizabeth's resilience shifted the cultural narrative around survival. She rejected shame. She challenged harmful myths about victim responsibility. That public stance likely influenced how future cases are discussed. Yet trauma recovery is not linear. It is complex, private, and ongoing. So while the world celebrated her strength, what internal battles remained unseen? And how do survivors rebuild trust after prolonged coercion? Like this video, if you believe survivor voices matter. Brian David Mitchell remains incarcerated, serving a life sentence. His public voice has largely faded, but the questions surrounding his mindset persist in academic and legal circles. Was he an extremist exploiting faith, a man lost in delusion, or someone who consciously weaponized belief for control? The difference matters because prevention strategies depend on accurate understanding. What do you think, ideology or pathology? Comment below before we examine the lasting implications. The role of disguise in this case deserves attention. Elizabeth was often veiled, concealed, coached to avoid eye contact. That tactic relied heavily on social norms. People hesitate to intrude, especially when religion or cultural appearance is involved. That hesitation created cover. So here's the twist. Was the disguise effective because it was convincing, or because bystanders didn't want to challenge it? What would you have done in that moment? Investigators later emphasized how crucial one observant citizen's tip proved to be. A single moment of doubt can change everything. That raises a broader issue. How often do instincts go unreported? Fear of being wrong, fear of embarrassment. In this case, acting on suspicion saved a life. But acting too quickly in other situations can harm innocent people. Where is the balance? Type balance in the comments if you think awareness is key. When examining Mitchell's interviews, analysts note inconsistencies, selective silence in court, yet articulate religious proclamations elsewhere. That duality fuels debate. Genuine mental disorder rarely turns on and off so conveniently, yet legal standards require specific thresholds. So here's what still doesn't make sense to some observers. Why maintain silence in front of a jury if innocence was the claim? Was silence strategic or symptomatic? Share your theory respectfully below. The Smart family's persistence changed investigative momentum. They refused to let the case fade. That relentless advocacy demonstrates the power of sustained visibility. But imagine the emotional toll of hope stretching across 9 months. Every rumor, every tip, every disappointment. What investigators believed at first that time was running out eventually shifted toward improbable survival. That reversal is rare. What lessons can families learn from this case? Stay with me as we move toward reflection. In many ways, this case became a study in coercive control. Not chains, not constant physical force, but psychological captivity. Experts later pointed out that fear can immobilize even when escape appears physically possible. That nuance challenges simplistic assumptions about why didn't she run? It reframes the entire narrative. So ask yourself, how often do we misunderstand survival behavior? Comment empathy if you believe perspective matters. As years pass, public memory softens details. But the core mystery remains compelling. How did this happen without earlier interruption? The warning signs were subtle, the persona convincing, the environment trusting. It's easy to say, I would have known, but would we? That's the uncomfortable truth at the heart of this story. Before we close, consider this carefully. Are we better prepared today or just more informed? What is known is clear. Elizabeth Smart was kidnapped in 2002 and recovered in 2003. Brian David Mitchell was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. Wanda Barzee served time for her role. Those are facts. But what remains less clear is the precise boundary between belief and manipulation in Mitchell's mind. Did he see himself as righteous? Or was righteousness merely camouflage? The distinction lingers even now. What do you believe? This case still matters because it exposed vulnerabilities within homes, within communities, within perception. It forced law enforcement to reevaluate response strategies for child abductions. It reshaped conversations around survivor advocacy. Yet unresolved questions continue to echo. Could earlier intervention have prevented months of captivity? Could community awareness have shortened the timeline? Or was this crime designed to bypass every safeguard? Share your perspective below. In the end, this is not just a story about a twisted mind. It is a story about resilience, vigilance, and the thin line between trust and deception. We know the outcome, we know the verdict, but we may never fully understand the mindset that fueled it. And perhaps that uncertainty is the most unsettling detail of all. What unanswered question stays with you? Comment below and subscribe to Crime Rift for more deep investigations. Even after sentencing, discussions about this case continue in classrooms, legal seminars, and psychology forums. It serves as a reference point for debates about competency, coercion, and cult-like manipulation. That longevity shows its impact goes beyond headlines. But here's the lingering twist. Cases like this often fade emotionally while remaining academically relevant. Should society revisit them more often to reinforce awareness? Or does constant revisiting risk reopening wounds? For many viewers, the most haunting detail isn't the disguise or the courtroom drama. It's the proximity. The idea that danger can emerge from someone briefly welcomed into a home. That contradiction shakes basic assumptions about safety. What investigators believed at first stranger danger evolved into something far more complex. Familiarity became the entry point. So how do families balance openness with caution today? The Elizabeth Smart kidnapping remains one of the most discussed abduction cases of the early 2000s. Not because of spectacle, but because of survival, accountability, and the unsettling psychology behind it. Brian David Mitchell's motives may be debated, but the consequences are undeniable, and the lessons are still unfolding. If the story moved you, share it. If it made you think, comment below. And ask yourself, what warning signs are we still overlooking?